I went through some pretty profound changes just to let people know that this healing journey, it's not for the weak, but it is incredible the results you get when you really dig into the true roots of where things are coming from.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say, I'm glad I had bladder issues, but I,
Right.
but in a way, I'm really glad that it happened because I think if it hadn't manifested like that, it would have manifested as something else, maybe worse down the line. And this made me dive really deep into the roots to do brain training and to not only work on the physical aspects of my health, but also on all of the emotional and trauma parts that were contributing to my health.
You know?
And I know for me, especially like in the beginning, when I first started having some physical health, like I was only really focused on the physical health issues, and I was really obsessed with treating the physical aspect. Like there's an infection, or
Yeah.
if there's not an infection, I need an installation. And not that I didn't need those things, but I've slowly accepted that I'm like, okay, this is more complex than just a physical problem. And then the
Yes.
the emotional aspect started coming up, the trauma aspect, and it was way deeper than I would have ever expected. And it took me a long time to accept it because it's hard to go there. It's hard to be like,
Yes.
my body is basically giving me a lot of alarms and I'm not listening.
Yes.
So it's been the dual approach that's given me the most benefit. I don't
Yes.
think one or the other would have been enough on its own. But if I had to pick one or the other, it almost seems like the trauma response rewiring and the emotional healing probably is more significant, even though it's the longer and the harder piece. But I still have to take care of like the underlying infections and whatever
Yes,
else has
but those
happened.
infections may not have ever taken over in
Yeah,
the first place had you not had a dysregulated nervous system, right?
absolutely.
So that's the really interesting thing about this that most people don't realize. And that's part of why I think your story is really, really powerful because you got to see, what you could do through your mind and your nervous system, even after the infection had resolved, but you still had pain.
I had lingering pain. I mean, and chronic. And
Yeah.
yeah, I love that you asked me to do this because it's something I've become really passionate about. And obviously my soapbox right now is just to like my friends and my family.
So, Ramesa, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about what was going on with your medical situation. How was your health before you and I met? And what was your journey with that like before we met?
So I had a series of different symptoms start popping up over the course of a couple of different years. And at the time, wasn't, I was on and off insurance and I was pretty reliant on just like conventional medical. So I was going to urgent cares. And then from urgent cares, I was transferred to like, you need a primary care. And I was just getting multiple different people telling me multiple different things. And it was so exhausting, especially when it started getting to a place where people were like, this might just be in your head. That was the most depressing, where I was like, this isn't in my head. And to be specific, the physical problems first manifested as body rashes. And then I got that pretty much under control using some conventional methods like prednisone and lotions. And then later on, when the bladder symptoms started, it came on as UTI symptoms. And I was used to having UTIs. I'd had them before, but all my normal protocols like D-mannose and some supplements weren't working. And so when I went to the urgent cares, all they really did was prescribe me antibiotics, even despite the fact that I had negative test results. So here I am, just extremely frustrated. The antibiotics are wrecking havoc on my gut and my mood. And they just keep giving me extra rounds like, oh, let's try a stronger antibiotic. And I was like, is there anything coming up in the test? No, nothing's coming up in the test. I was like, well, then there's got to be another option. So 4 or 5 rounds of antibiotics in, I just stopped. Like I just accepted that I have bladder issues. I was on the verge of thinking maybe I had interstitial cystitis. I waited months to get in with a women's specialist who had the knowledge and the diagnostic tools to do PCR testing. And so that was the first time I started getting some answers. I was like, okay, there is bacteria there. Turns out I had had this long-standing infection, just conventional culture couldn't pick it up. So I dove into Google and the UTI websites. I think one of my favorite ones was I can't remember, it's UTI something, but there was a lot of good information on there, particularly about doing microgenics testing, PCR testing, talking about biofilms. And so I dove into it. I treated it with the proper antibiotics, the infection that I had, but the symptoms didn't go away. So then I was referred over to conventional urology, who decided to do a series of installations because I had no positive test results. Those did help. I can't say
What
that they
kind of
didn't help.
installations were they? Just so people know.
They were a cocktail of heparin, by sodium bicarbonate. I want to say there's one more ingredient in there, but I think it just it coated it, and it was soothing. The urethral placement was irritating, so I had to do one a week for like 8 weeks. So it was definitely very nerve wracking. And so for anyone out there that has these problems, like I can empathize so much because it was terrifying. Like you're already in pain, you're already urinating frequently, and then they want to put tubes up there and they don't really explain much to you. They're like, this is just what we're doing. They just gave me some like hydroxyzine, but didn't really tell me what it was for. So trying to piece together why I was even doing the things I was doing was really left to me, because Western medicine, as we all know, the doctor might be with you for 15 minutes. It's not that reassuring to be like, okay, do this, we're going to do this. And then that's it. You're like, okay. The other direction at the same time I was doing, they led me to pelvic floor therapy. And I do think that was valuable. It took some time to find a practitioner that I actually felt comfortable with because it's a really vulnerable situation to be in. So I went through a couple of conventional physical therapists before I ended up working with a naturopath that was a holistic pelvic floor therapist. And that gave me more help than conventional PT because, and as we'll dive into this later in our conversation, it dove more into the emotional aspects and what I was holding in these areas of tension in my pelvic floor. But anyway, I'm derailing. Back to the conventional journey. So I did the installations. It got to a place where it was manageable. I was like, maybe I can live like this. Unfortunately, sex was still something that was difficult. And so it wasn't perfect, but I wasn't in constant pain or constant urgency. I finally got frustrated with that. I was like, this isn't good enough. And so it led me to find you. And I guess I can talk about art.
Yeah. So how was your journey working with me naturopathically different from what you'd experienced before? And, what do you think it added to your figuring this whole process out and what was going on with your body?
Well, like I had mentioned before, like many of us who have been on the conventional medical journey, I was just getting frustrated with the minimal amount of time that doctors were spending with me, despite the fact that I had years of these chronic issues at this point and doing nothing more than just prescribing something or referring me to somebody else, basically. In the urologist specialists that I saw, they were really quick and didn't really take a lot of time. It just felt like no one really was listening to the fact that I was suffering. I was like, this is affecting my entire life. Like, I just need someone to actually care. And I'm not saying they didn't.
Totally.
I'm just it didn't feel like it.
Yes.
So when I found you, I saw that you had experience in chronic illness. And at this point, I was accepting the fact that I had chronic bladder issues. But I was very surprised to find your techniques basically uncovered things that I didn't know that were causing or contributing to the problem. Nor did I expect it to take me down this route of healing that's much deeper than I ever could have gone. So starting out with that autonomic response testing, is that what it's called? That's what it stands for? Okay.
You got it. You got it. It's perfect.
I will say for everybody out there who's never done it, at first you might feel a little skeptical, just like you're putting your arm in the air and you're like, this is really weird. But at this point, you're like, I've done every conceivable urine test, STI test, vaginal test. It's like, okay,
Right. Totally. Why not? Right? What do you
why
have to
not?
lose?
Conventional medicine is failing me right now, and I've not had a lot of faith in it to begin with. And so everything that was coming up from this reading was very intuitive. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like me. Even stuff as simple as like your body is just suggesting that you need more of this supplement. Like I'll never forget, I remember one of the things that came up was a methylated B12, and I think there was like folate in there too. And a couple of years later, I found out that I have like an MTHFR mutation. It's like the body knows what it needs. Like we just
Yes.
have to be able to tap in to listening to it. And
Yes.
I think in our overwhelmingly busy culture where we are basically just pushed to strive to be competitive, to be the best, to work all the time, to be a partner, to be a parent, like we don't really take the time to just sit and listen to our own bodies until it hurts. And at that point,
Exactly.
things have been wrong for a while. We're just not listening. And so with art, it uncovered Lyme, which I was completely surprised to hear. It uncovered some nutritional stuff I needed, and I started taking a variety of supplements to support those needs. And I felt better than I did the entire time. Um, I did that for probably about a year with you, I think. I came back a few different times to check in. And I remember you telling me, like, I'd want to add in a new supplement, or like, do you think I should go back to this? And you were like, let's just see what your body says. And so, unlike listening to or like looking at a medical script, which is I feel like what conventional doctors do, like, okay, well, you're presenting with this and this and this, or we're just going to do this. But even though I have bladder symptoms, it might be different from a woman that has bladder symptoms. Like, we're going to have different situations, or causes are going to be different. So healing, listening to my body with art got me further along in progress than I had the entire time. And I kept that up for quite a while. Um, during that time, you brought up to me the brain retraining.
Yeah. So, um, before we jump into that,
Mhm.
I just want you to tell people what your life was like after you had done ART for a while and you got the results from it. Can you tell us like what symptoms you had, or what symptoms were gone, or 90% better, or whatever? Just so people have a sense of what you accomplished there.
Absolutely. So at the point when I had come to see you, I had a lot of these lingering bladder issues. Like I'd have several days, maybe a couple weeks where I was like, okay, this feels okay. But then it would flare back up. And it was really hard to tell what was flaring it. That was part of the big frustration. I was like, was it something I ate? Was it stress? Was it sex? Was it exercise? I was still struggling with having sex. Um, and mostly just not knowing was so frustrating. And so I was trying to do all these strict diets, and that wasn't really helping. And so coming in, number one, discovering that Lyme was present was a really big thing, because it sent me down a path that I probably wouldn't have taken because I didn't know that I had Lyme. And the
Right.
more I
And
learned,
not just Lyme actually, but more than one tick-borne infection, right? And
yes.
that ended up becoming really important later. One of the other ones, the babesia.
Oh yeah, that's right. So I had like, yeah, I'm just overwhelmed with how limited the Western testing is, because no one even thought that or put me in that direction. And so a couple of years later, I even reinforced it with blood tests, and it 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 was there. And I'm lucky that I found it earlier and started treating it, because I feel like I've kept it at bay and have been controlling it for all that time. And in fact, when I took a break from the treatment that you suggested, things got worse. And so I remember the bladder stuff started getting significantly better with the Lyme and the babesia treatments. I took a specific little tincture, and I remember it was strong, and I had some die-off reactions from it. But you had set me up with some hertzing protocols, and so you coached me to go really slow, and I went really slow, and I worked up to it, and I went from 1 drop to 15 drops twice a day, which was a big thing for me. And I did it really slowly with your coaching. And over time, the bladder symptoms went down. The art addressed some hormonal deficiencies I had. So I think I went on pregnenolone at the time, some B vitamins. I don't remember all of them, but I remember my libido started coming back, my energy level started coming back, um, my ability to have sex got better. It wasn't like 100%, but I also knew that it was going to take some time. But the fact that I could even have sex and not completely flare up was a really, really awesome experience.
Yeah. And I think you even went without bladder pain for a period of time,
Hmm.
which
I
was
went like
so exciting.
months without bladder pain. And I remember just being like, is this my, is this my new normal? Is it okay to relax into this?
Yeah, right. Which is like one of those really important realizations about ourselves, I think, is that when we've been sick, we've had symptoms for a period of time, like a long period of time, we get hyper vigilant about them, right? And like
Yes,
when they go away, we almost like can't trust it, right? There's this like anxiety that happens, like, oh no, it's going to come back, right? And that's one of the things that brain retraining can really, really help with. So we'll get into that. But
that's very real. Like when I started feeling better, I kept being a little on guard. Like, is it going to come back? How long is this going to last?
yeah,
But it kept going. And the better I felt long term, the more I felt reassured that I was going to feel better long term. And it just gave me a lot of hope, like, oh, I am healing. Whereas for 3 years, maybe I had no hope. I was like, I just have to live like this. So
yeah,
just switching that positive gear into like, I now feel the hope was a huge recovery point for me.
yeah.
Um,
You
but
know,
yeah,
I think the other thing I wanted to mention that I think ART does for people is like just the knowledge of what is underlying the symptoms. I think gives people so much of a sense of empowerment, right? Because
absolutely.
then if the symptoms do come back, you kind of know the general direction you need to go in. You're like, oh, well, if they were due to Lyme before, they're probably still due to Lyme. So I probably just need to treat Lyme again, right?
Exactly.
As opposed to just feeling so freaked out or just about the unknown, just being in the dark, like, why is my body doing this? And a lot of people will then go down the road of my body is betraying me, and like I can't trust my body, those kinds of things. And I think that can spiral into a really damaging psychological state.
100%. And that's pretty much where I was at in terms of feeling at odds with my body. I mean, I even use those exact words. I feel like my body's sabotaging me. It just is ruining my life. And that's a really depressing place to be when you're just not synchronized with your own body. And
Yeah.
the Lyme diagnosis was huge, just like you said, because now if it flares up, I'm like, okay, I need to go back to treating this. Like I understand what Lyme is now.
Mhm.
Um,
And
and
then
for
it can live in the bladder, which very few people know.
I don't know that. And
Yeah,
that's what
it's
really
so
frustrates me
important.
with the blanket interstitial cystitis diagnosis, because there's so many women out there that I've read on forums, like I have interstitial cystitis. I'm like, have you tested for Lyme?
Yes.
Have you tested for urine because like we can't
Yeah.
all just have this like, oh, your bladder just hurts for no reason, you know?
Right. It doesn't make any sense. No.
No.
Yeah. So what was so you got like dramatically better with ART, and then you stopped doing some of the treatments and regressed, and then we started brain retraining. But can you tell us a little bit about what was happening in your life right before the symptoms onset, and just like in your life generally, because uh, that sets the stage for why you and I did brain retraining in the first place.
Yes. And so throughout this healing process, once I got into naturopathic care and once I started working with you with art, there came in the component of the underlying emotional healing, which conventional medicine will never touch.
Yeah.
They're not going to spend enough time with you to get to know you to know, or they just seem to they don't seem to put together. But anyway, um, you started asking me questions about, and we started. You recommended brain retraining, and I started seeing one of the ladies you recommended,
Mhm.
and I went in there specifically for I want my bladder to feel better, and this was alongside our physical treatments. And so I think you and I touched on this a little bit, but I definitely think for me the healing and getting to where I am today was a two component thing. It's like the physical thing, I had to know there was a Lyme, I had to know these like underlying hormonal or nutritional deficiencies, but I also had to heal the underlying trauma, and emotional components that were feeding into this. And I think you need both.
Mhm. Yeah.
And like we talked about earlier, I think you can do the physical stuff all you want, but if you don't work on this underlying brain retraining, you're only going to get limited results and they're going to keep coming back. But with the brain retraining and the emotional healing, I'm able to prevent relapses. I'm able to see them before they come. I'm able to recognize, like, okay, I've been really stressed out and I'm known to have a flare when I stress out. So what can I do? What are my tools?
Yeah.
Whereas 3 years ago, it's just incredible to think that I was completely in the dark. Like I'd have a horrible flare and I'd be like, I don't know why this is happening. And now I'm actually preventing them from happening,
Yes.
right?
So much power back.
It feels empowering.
Yeah.
So I want everyone to know that healing is not streamlined. It's not like linear. It's a multi-pronged approach, but it is very possible. And I've told people when this first happened, I was really like, why is this happening to me? This really sucks. But I honestly don't think I'd be who I am today if it hadn't been for this. And it's made me go in a direction of self-growth and healing, um, that I appreciate.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think I went on a tangent. Sorry.
So yeah, no, it's okay. No, I was just asking, what what happened in your life? What was going on
Oh,
inside of
that's right.
you that propelled you to do the brain retraining
So
emotionally?
to get a little personal, because I know a lot of people have relationships and relationships can be difficult and traumatic. But at the time my bladder pain and started, I was really having a difficult time with my partner. I love him dearly. We had been together over 10 years at the time. Um, but he had developed alcoholism and it was getting more and more challenging to be around. And I started realizing that because my father was an alcoholic, I was very tolerant of my partner's alcoholic behavior, even though it was extremely unhealthy to be around. And I was developing a very codependent relationship with him, but it was wrecking havoc on me emotionally. And as we now see, physically.
Yeah.
Um, yes, that was sorry.
It's okay.
it's just It's just
Great.
a lot. Um, Sorry, where are we going again?
We were just talking about just emotional events in your life that necessitated the brain retraining, traumas, because as we know from the ACEs study, that the more adverse childhood events you have, the
Yeah.
more likely you are to have chronic illness. And that's a study about childhood traumas, but also adulthood traumas and stress are very strongly linked to the development of chronic illness too. So, this is what you and I talked about. I think that ultimately propelled you to say, okay, I'm going to give this a try, see what it can do.
The adult trauma, I think, spurred me to go deeper into the childhood trauma. And I think that's where I really started uncovering a lot of my patterns that I had with my current relationship. and with people around me, and even still with my parents. But diving into it, we found that the relationship I had had with my parents had been straining and had created a lot of trauma on me. And particularly my dad's alcoholism and my mother's mental illness, being unstable and living in a lifestyle, military lifestyle where we're moving around a lot,
Yeah.
really created a lot of havoc internally. And I had never really thought about it that much as a contribution to my health issues. But
Yeah.
as we got into the brain retraining, we dove a lot into that. That's what would come up.
Mhm.
We'd focus in on a feeling, and as we dove into it and you ask the questions, what would come up would be memories from my childhood and memories from my past. And
Mhm.
working to reframe those and to see those differently really helped to change my behaviors in my daily life. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. And I think also the beliefs that came out of some of those situations with your family, because I know that, when we're not always consciously aware of them, but as kids, when we're watching our parents, especially up to the age of 7, we're just soaking in everything that they do and forming our identity and also our perspectives on how the world is, right? Like
Yeah.
what's normal. And so we form our very earliest and strongest belief systems at that time about ourselves and about the world. And so we had to work on some of those beliefs that were fueling present day anxiety and trauma responses and self-worth issues and all that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely. Diving into imagining being like a child and having the instability of a parent. And I know this is extremely common.
Yeah.
Parents, I want to stay straight out that like my parents did the best they could with what they had. And I know they loved me. And I think that's the case for many parents. But the more I talk to people, everyone has experienced some amount of childhood trauma, because when you're that young and the people that are your caretakers are unstable, and
Mhm.
that could be a lot of fighting, emotional volatility. Maybe they have major depression. It can
Mhm.
create trauma in you as a child. And then we just carry that through life. And
Yes.
so I realized through all this work with the brain training that I was regulating, like my nervous system is very upregulated on a regular basis. And
Mhm.
so learning to bring down my nervous system to a place that's a little bit more manageable gave me a little bit more room to be able to respond to the stressors in my daily life. But if
Yeah.
you're already working at 75% capacity, like I'm already stressed out all the time. And I think you use the word, and it's been coming up in my life a lot, but it's hyper vigilance. Like I realize when you're growing up with instability as a child, you're hyper vigilant of your entire environment. So you're always on guard for like, what's the next thing that's going
Yeah.
to happen? Are we in a good mood? Are we in a bad mood? Are you going to yell? Are we moving again? Like, what's
Yeah,
happening? And
totally.
so I realize I've been living like that my entire adult life. And I've suddenly gotten old enough, and then the daily adult trauma and stressors are getting big enough that my body is at capacity. And
Yes.
that's when the health issues started.
Yep.
All of
Buckets
that,
overflowing, right?
it was just overflowing, and the body's like, we can't hold back anymore. And I sometimes not wonder, I think I know now that, like what we talked about earlier, would I have had the infections if I had learned to keep my nervous system calmer earlier?
Right.
We can't say for sure, and I can't like regret it, because I think we have the journeys we have, but the journey led me here for a reason.
Yeah.
um and that was because I needed to heal what was underneath.
Yes. But it is really interesting because through the journey, you learned that your nervous system controls, to a very large extent, your pain response in your bladder, but also your immune system, and what it's doing to some extent, because the two are related in terms of your bladder, the pain and the immune response, the inflammation level. And I know that you had a lot of issues with histamine as
Yeah.
well, and you could see the effect of the brain retraining on that kind of stuff too.
Oh, 100%. The histamine thing was a really big component. Whereas before, like we talked about, my bladder would have a flare and it would be like, I'd be stressing out, obsessing. Was it something I ate? Looking over the last 2 days of food. Was it this? Was it that? And I started seeing the connection between stressful events and my bladder flaring up and recognizing that when I'm stressed out, my entire nervous system is upregulated. My immune system is getting upregulated. There's histamine going everywhere, and it's causing these bladder flares. It's causing my stomach to hurt. I could feel my body just getting tense all over. And I'm like, well, no wonder I'm in pain. I started being able to see it better,
Mhm.
not isolated on just the bladder pain, but watching the entire body kind of in response to something that happened that day. And
Mhm.
it was unbelievable because whereas before, if my bladder flared, I would obsess over it. I just be like, my bladder hurts, my bladder hurts, my bladder hurts. And I'd be taking marshmallow and slippery elm and, whatever I could. And now I get to this point where when it does flare, which is so much less frequent, or even in the, a little bit later on after we started doing our brain training work, I would have a little bit of flare maybe in the evenings because I was stressed. And I'd be like, you know what? I know this is not an infection, because I would panic and I in the past and I would go to urgent care and get all these tests. And I got to a place where I was like, just lay down, breathe, tell
Mhm.
your body you're fine.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, the pain would subside. It
Nice.
Because it wasn't an infection. It was my body's nervous system getting all worked up. And I don't understand all the ins and outs of how histamine work, but I know it's related to like stress in your immune system.
Yes.
And that's a huge component for me, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so
So, did you ever have the experience of having a histamine flare that was really obvious and being able to calm that down with brain retraining?
yes.
Mhm.
So especially with stress, I'll notice I can kind of tell where I think histamine's involved because I'll get flushed. I'll start feeling anxious. My bladder will start getting irritated. And now I'm like, okay, you're stressed out. Your histamine's going a little crazy. And so one of my favorite things we learned actually was the vagus
Yeah.
nerve ear points. I use that like every day.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's
I
so
just do.
easy.
It's so easy and it immediately soothes me to a place where I start yawning. And once I start yawning, my body's like, okay, you're safe. And
Yeah.
when my body starts feeling safe, that histamine response calms down.
Yes.
That's pretty incredible.
So awesome.
Hmm.
I love that. Um, so can you tell us about the event a while back where you were having some major symptoms from babesia that were
Hmm.
taking you to urgent care in the ER, and
Yeah.
what happened in that session we had during one of those flares?
Well, there's a couple things I learned from you, which really started shedding some light. But about summer, about a year ago, I started developing what I could only describe as a very terrible panic attack with very physical sensations.
Mhm.
Um, it would manifest as I'd start feeling a little disassociated. My hands and my feet would start feeling a little numb and tingly. I felt like I could not breathe. What I now know is like air hunger. And I'd be trying to get a breath and I just can't get this breath. And this would lead me on a cycle of basically having a panic attack. So I'd end up in urgent care and they'd be like, you're having a panic attack. Not always that nicely. Sometimes they were nice, but sometimes they were like, you just need to breathe. You're having a panic attack. And then they'd send me home.
Yes.
But this happened over and over again. And I started being like, this is not just a normal panic attack. Like, I've had panic attacks. I've been anxious pretty much since I was a child, and I'd had a panic attack before. And maybe this could have been just a really extreme one, but I was convinced. I was like, there is a physical component to this because it lasts for hours. And sometimes it'll happen several days in a row. And I've never had panic attacks like that. And so I was again dismissed by conventional medicine, and just told to take anxiety meds. Um, but once I discovered in our session doing brain retraining about the babesia and the connection with the vagus nerve, now anytime those symptoms come up, I'm able to take power of my own body by telling my vagus nerve that I'm safe. And it takes a few minutes, but it literally brings me back to a place where I can take a breath. And I'm like, oh, I'm not dying. And it prevents the panic attack. Because it's
Yes.
really, you just have to remind yourself that you're like, I'm okay. This is something that's happening, but we're okay, right? You're safe.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so
There's no
in
tiger.
no, there's no tiger. My body.
Yes. Ah,
So that was a huge empowering moment for me. And to go back to that one session, it just happened to be that I had started my tick-borne illness treatment again after having taken a break for a long time. And I was having a really bad Herx response and freaking out. And I was on the verge of being like, I might have to go to the hospital because I feel like I'm dying. And we had a session,
mhm.
and you were like, we cannot do this. I was like, no, tell me I'm not, just talk to me. And you were able, and I think it was the best thing. I know it was the best thing that happened because the hospital would have just told me I was having a panic attack, but you very clearly explained what was going on. The BCA lives in your vagus nerve. It's gotten woken up and it's reacting and putting out toxins, and that's causing your vagus nerve to be triggered. And that feeling of not being able to breathe is just a response of that. So we were able to calm me down with the ear points and with tapping, that in our 2-hour session, I say within the first 30 minutes, I was like, all right, I'm not dying. I'm going to be okay. And by the end of the session, I was totally fine. And so
Yeah, incredible.
that is incredible. And so
Yeah.
now when I herx, I use those tools on myself to
Yes.
remind myself this is temporary. Your body's going through something. You're in charge. You're in charge of your body.
Yeah. That's awesome. And on your own, are you able to calm down a Herx reaction?
For the most, yeah, actually, I'm trying to think. Yes, because I had a really bad one about a month and a half ago,
Mhm.
and it was very similar to what I experienced when I was on the session with you. And I had the thoughts that were like, "You need to go to the hospital, like you're dying." And I
Mhm.
said, "No, this is what happened
Yeah.
when I was in retraining. You have the tools." And so I laid in bed, I breathed, I tapped, I did the ear points, focused on my breathing, and I let myself fall asleep and was able to get out of it, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Man, do you know how many people are out there that are having Herx reactions right now trying to treat their whatever infection? And they think that the only tools they have are herbs and supplements, but it's not. There's
It's
actually
not.
more, they have more power than that. And that it doesn't have to be expensive to manage those reactions.
No, I think the
So,
emotional control is more valuable, or at least as valuable as a lot of the herxing supplements. And of course, I do those things as well. Like I take the
yeah.
binders and the glutathione, and that's
Yeah.
all really helpful. But the worst part for me is when the mental part takes over. I
Mhm.
have to really calm that down to remind myself, like, your body's healing. Like,
Yes.
let's feel
Yes.
safe.
Because otherwise it just keeps going, right? Just
It just
escalates
keeps
and escalates and
going.
escalates. Yeah.
And that upregulation is really detrimental to me, to my body, probably to healing. It's difficult on my partner.
Yep.
It's just, and so it's really valuable to me to have the tools to be able to calm my own self down. Because one of the hardest parts I think about having panic attacks or anxiety in general is you feel really helpless and you're so reliant on someone else to
Yeah.
cure it, to make it go away. And that's
Totally.
not always possible. I mean,
Right.
your partner can't always be the one that's going to ground you, or you can't go to urgent care every single day. But if
Yes.
you have the tools to calm yourself down, it's like the most invaluable thing
Mhm.
I
Totally.
have found.
So would you say that your nervous system is a lot calmer on a daily basis now than it was before brain training?
Yes, I would definitely say that, um, because life is always stressful. I mean,
Yeah.
the stressors that I had when I first met you are still present in my
Mhm.
current life.
Mhm.
I will say a lot of it has improved with brain retraining. I don't know if if this is an okay time to get into it, but one of the first things I really started seeing is as I was changing my response to stressful situations, it was so subtle. I wouldn't even almost recognize what it was at first. And then I'd realize like my partner's response was different than what it had been in the past. And I was like, that was interesting. You know?
Yeah.
And then it was spilled over into maybe a work relationship or an interaction with my parents where I set a boundary, or
Mhm.
um, maybe my partner and I had a cycle of behavior and I said, I'm not doing, today. Okay, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. And I didn't go into the cycle, and it made him calm down. So I started seeing improvement in my own relationships because of my own changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think when you started doing this work, like you felt so empowered actually that you and your partner sort of took a break and decided to do counseling and like, just really start working on your relationship on a level you had not done before.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was huge because up until that point, we had talked about marriage counseling. We had talked about him going to counseling. And I finally, with brain retraining, was able to get to a place where I wasn't being the participant in the cycle, right? I was removing myself from that. I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And it took actually it didn't take, it was pretty quick because his response would be different because I'm responding differently. And over the course of some weeks and a few months, I had moved out because I said, I need space from this. I'm trying to heal. You're trying to heal. So we took some time apart. And around that time, he started going to therapy on his own.
Mhm.
We got a marriage counselor.
Mhm.
We started piecing together, or I guess breaking down and then piecing back together our problems and our behaviors. And it has made a huge change in my relationship and in my life
Yeah.
because
And
your
now you
relationship,
guys are back together.
we live back together again. And honestly, I think the time apart was really good because it gave me the space to realize that well, I should put myself first in a lot of ways because I was in a cycle of really people pleasing, and I think a lot of people with childhood trauma are.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll have varieties of it, but the way mine manifested, and I know I'm not alone, is very much a caretaking role and always feeling responsible for other people's feelings or other people's behaviors or emotions and trying to fix everything. So the
Yeah.
brain rewiring really helped me take a step back to be like, this is not my problem to fix. You
Mhm.
know, I can only take care of this. Me.
Yes.
So the more
Yes.
I did that, the more it gave him space to be like, oh, she's not taking care of me. I need to take care of myself. And the thing is, he probably doesn't even want me to take care of him. Like it's just this cycle we got into. And
Totally.
so here we are today, and we are like, we go to marriage counseling every week. We have emotional responsibility. We respond more than we react. It's not
Mhm.
always perfect. We all know
Yeah.
relationships are hard. We still get annoyed. He still has bad days, but I
Sure.
don't embody it as much. I don't try to fix it for him. I let him have his space. And
Yep.
that allows me to heal because
Yeah.
it's hard to heal when you're focusing on other people.
Yes. It's a lot of energy, right? And
It's
it's
a
a lot of
lot of
stress.
energy.
When you take responsibility for other people, it's like this whole other level of stress.
100% on top of your already existing stress.
Yeah, exactly. You're
You
like, "Oh,
know?
I'm sick and I'm gonna try to take care of you too."
Yeah. And
That's a
then not
lot.
to mention, just like most of us, you have a relationship with a parent that maybe you feel a caretaker role for, or a sibling or a
Yeah.
friend. So it's a
Yeah,
lot.
totally. Um, so I know one of the things that really blossomed for you through brain retraining was a greater sense of self-worth and confidence.
Hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like before and after for you?
Yeah. Actually, I went through some pretty profound changes just to let people know that this healing journey, it's not for the weak, but it is incredible the results you get when you really dig into the true roots of where things are coming from.
Mhm.
And it's hard to say, I'm glad I had bladder issues, but I,
Right.
but in a way, I'm really glad that it happened because I think if it hadn't manifested like that, it would have manifested as something else, maybe worse down the line. And this made me dive really deep into the roots to do brain training and to not only work on the physical aspects of my health, but also on all of the emotional and trauma parts that were contributing to my health. Um, and so at the time when I met you, I was still waiting tables and I was not happy. I felt stuck. I had been a traveling musician with my partner, which was a very, very fun life, but it was very unstable financially and also unstable in the sense that we were living in an RV and moving around all the
Yeah.
time and
Yeah.
very adventurous. I liked it, but I got to a point where I wanted a little bit of stability. So we came to Eugene and I was waiting tables just as income until I figured out what I wanted to do. I was thinking about going back to school. I was thinking about going back on the road. It was a big transitional place, and we weren't used to being still.
Mhm.
I was not used to being still. I know my partner wasn't either. I grew up as a military kid, moving around every 2 to 3 years. I had never lived anywhere for more than 3 years. And here I was in a place that we had been there about 3 years, and all I wanted to do was leave. I was like, everything sucks. I just want to go. And this work started about then, and it made me realize that I wanted stability. Like I wanted a home base. I wanted all these things I'd never had. I was just used to instability. And so I kept doing it. So that
Yeah.
was one piece. The other piece is I didn't have the confidence to go out. Like I didn't feel like I deserved to have money. Like I was so used to being broke that that was just my generally accepted life. I was like, this is just where I'm at. I
Mhm.
didn't come from a rich family. No one taught me how to have money.
Yeah.
And as I started getting better, I got into real estate and my confidence started blossoming and I got into this job and it was definitely challenging. I had to learn a lot, but I changed my financial future. And I don't know if that would have happened if I hadn't had all this stuff happen, you know? So
Ah,
I'm here now in a completely financial different situation. I feel confident in that aspect of my life for the first time in my entire life. I feel in control of it, and that is healing in its own way.
yeah.
I feel more confident because I can take care of myself. I can
Totally.
actually start helping take care of other people, which is something I've always wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, and it's leading me down a new path of now I'm starting to dive into like, what are my passions, you know, and how can I explore those more? So, anyway, meeting your basic needs, I think, starts opening up. Now I can focus on more on the things I love, right? Like the hierarchy of needs. Like now I don't
Yes.
have pain. I'm not miserable all the time. I'm not depressed and anxious. I have money now. Now I can
Right.
start focusing on giving back and doing things I love.
Yeah, just thriving, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. So I don't actually know the answer to this. Had you tried anything to help with your trauma or mental emotional struggles before brain training?
I had gone through therapy off and on,
Okay.
talk therapy, and it was very sporadic. I think I had my first therapist when I was 18, only because I started realizing like, something's off. Like this anxiety doesn't seem normal. Once I started being around other adults, but other than I had tried medication,
Yeah.
uh, not really desiring it, but feeling like it was necessary and not having the best results as a lot of people had experienced because it was came with a host of side effects.
Yeah.
Um, I did a lot of supplements and I did get some good results from like 5-HTP
Mhm.
and lifestyle changes like quitting drinking and caffeine and eating
Yeah.
healthier and things like that. But the talk therapy is great, but I think it's limited to some point because if you're not, you can talk all day long about, oh yeah, I had this trauma. And it was really helpful to help me realize, like, oh, I guess I did have trauma. But to actually go into the trauma and change the way your body is responding today is where I think the most change happens,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
So what was that experience like? Like how do you experience your traumas when you look back on them today? Like if you think about something that happened in childhood that we worked on, How do you experience it now? What does your body do? What does your brain do? How does it feel different from the way it was before?
There's less of a negative response to it. Like in the past, when I dove into those in talk therapy, it was really painful to look at. Like, oh, like man, it's just really hard to see your parents that that love you, to see them doing this to you, and to see how much pain it caused you and the rippling effects of how now you're behaving as an adult. But
Yeah.
then going into brain retraining and reframing how you see that changes the response I have when I think of those memories now. So when I think like, oh, that happened, it's hard to explain. It's so subtle, but it's just like, my parents did the best they could with what they had. And I was really young and I interpreted it in a really scary way where it really wasn't as scary as it was, and I don't have to respond like that anymore. Like my nervous system, just understanding that, like the nervous system was programmed to behave this way, but I don't need that programming anymore. And
Yeah.
slowly unwinding that, um, I just think back now and I think I have character because like I had these experiences, and
Yeah.
recovering from them has made giving me even more character and more depth, and hopefully, able to share my story with other people that know that there's hope for recovery.
Mhm. So when you think on those traumatic events now, do you have to coach yourself into not responding the same way, or does it just happen naturally
It
to
just For most
respond
of the
differently?
events, I just respond naturally now.
Yeah.
Like obviously occasionally some new stuff will come up that I
Yeah.
might want to bring back up in retraining and be like, let's address this. But the stuff that we've worked on either doesn't come up, like I don't really think about it anymore, or if it does come up, I just don't have a very physical response to it.
Right. Your
And that
body just stays calm.
it stays calm, yes.
Yeah.
Whereas before, like in our retraining sessions, we'd get into this horrible memory and you'd be like, how do you feel? I was like, it's like a 10. I don't like it. Get me
Yeah.
out of here. I don't want to go there. And then we do the brain retraining. We think of all the positive, like all these happy memories and all these things we love. And then all of a sudden you're looking at it and you're like, oh, well, yeah, that happened. That's not bad.
I think it's so valuable to describe that for people because there are so many people that don't even know that's possible with their traumas.
Yeah.
They just think like, oh yeah, I'm always going to freak out when I think about that because it was a painful experience, but it's not happening now, right? That's the point. And your nervous system just doesn't know that until you teach it that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And now your nervous system's like, oh, yeah, that was a really long time ago. Like, why are we holding on to that?
Right. Yeah. It's like as if your nervous system was still reacting to a movie you saw 20 years ago. It's just like, no, that doesn't need to happen
That's
now.
a really good way to explain it. It's like your brain just replays these movies in your mind. And every time you're replaying it, your nervous system's just responding negatively and
Yeah.
hijacking your entire body. And
Yeah.
then
As if
now
it's happening right now.
yes.
Yeah.
And I started realizing that every time I'm reliving these traumas, or maybe responding to a trauma, like something happening in my daily life that's similar to so the nervous system is basically like interpreting it, right? As like, this is danger, this is danger. But once we teach it to be like, look, it's not danger. It's not danger. Like I know it felt unsafe at that time, but we're adult now and it's not a tiger. And your body's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's not a tiger. We're okay. And your body can actually heal. Like I feel miraculously physically better since doing retraining, brain retraining. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. So what do you think how do you feel about the process? Because like the process itself is also really different from counseling or therapy. It's really different from EMDR and, a lot of other mental and emotional type approaches. So what can you tell people about that will maybe help them feel more inspired or motivated to try it or less intimidated at least?
I would say for sure, number one, have faith in the process because the first time you do it, you're going to be like, what are we doing?
Like, this is weird, different.
Really different. But all of a sudden, you'll have your one session and you'll immediately notice the calming effects. And then as you start seeing the effects in your daily life, you see how it's working and you're motivated to do it more.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the sessions are actually really fun. They're really interactive.
Mhm.
Whereas like with talk therapy, I think it's easy to dive really like get too deep into the dark stuff sometimes and just go on and loop.
Yep.
Um, or you're listening to your therapist, right? Like talking to you about it. But with this, it's really interactive. It's not like you talk, I talk. It's like we're doing this together and you're walking me through the steps. And so um it just feels really safe. It feels almost like a little bit of a game. Like
Yeah.
and so to give people an idea, we'll maybe whatever's going on in my life that day, like it's like I'm really struggling with anxiety right now, or whatever, or bladder pain, whatever it may be. And so we'll figure out some memories that are coming up
Mhm.
surrounding this current experience. And then we go into it. And for me, I think I'm very vocal. And so talking about stuff really helps me to bring it to life. But I think everybody's different.
Yeah.
And like Dr. Keratin has taught me, like there's all kinds of different ways to do brain retraining dependent on how your brain responds the best. And so you could be visual, you could be vocal, you could be tactile.
Mhm.
And so we go into the bad memory, we go deep into it. For me, I explain it, I really start feeling it. Dr. Keratin asked me where I'm at. And I'm like, I'm at a 9-10. Like, this doesn't feel good. And then we'll go into the tapping and we'll go into these pre-curated happy memories that we've already picked out, right? Like my favorite smells, my favorite colors, how I feel with my dog. And we'll just flood with all this positivity. And
Yes.
they're like, where are you at now? It's like, oh, I'm like half better, right? I'm like a 4 or 5. And then we'll try a different modality. So maybe it was tapping, but this time she has me like standing up and dancing and singing,
Yes.
or tapping my head and circling, or just this random fun stuff. And so all of a sudden I'm laughing because I'm jumping around and dancing, I'm singing at the top of my lungs. So then we come back to it, go back to that bad memory, and I'm like, it actually seems like a 1. Like I'm laughing, like I'm looking at it like, oh, no
Yeah.
big deal. It's pretty fun.
That was a great description,
Was
actually.
it? Okay.
And also illustrates how well you've learned it by now. I can tell you can do it all on your own now. And I love that because the whole point of this brain retraining process is to empower people to be able to manage their own nervous system, right? Like, I
Yes.
don't want people to be dependent on me. I'm not interested in being people's therapist, although I love helping people. My goal is for people to have the tools to heal themselves, right?
Yes.
And so I love that you have learned it to the point that you can do it for yourself, which is super,
Absolutely. And
yeah.
with working with you, you find out what works best for you, whether it's tactile or vocal or whatever. I think physical is really helpful for me too, like touch.
Yes.
But learning that in our sessions and then incorporating it in my personal life is really helpful. You learn about yourself through the process,
Yes.
what works for you. And I guess I'd like people to know that it's extremely empowering to know that you can take care of yourself, like you can heal yourself. Ultimately, our bodies are going to heal ourselves. Like it's not outside. I mean, we can put some outside influence into it, but I've become more aware that my nervous system state and my brain state is ultimately the key to my well-being.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say to women with chronic bladder pain issues or interstitial cystitis or chronic bladder infections, that particular subset of people that I know are really struggling out there, to give them hope and inspire them to keep going, and that the answers are out there?
Yes, the answers are out there. I would like everyone to please don't stop with one doctor's diagnosis or two doctors' diagnosis. Know that even though these doctors are probably doing the best they can, it's just not a very well known area, unfortunately. Uh, and we're constantly uncovering new information about the bladder and the biofilm and what's in there. I mean, they used to think urine was completely sterile. Like now we know it's
I
completely.
know, totally. Yeah.
not true, you know?
Yes.
And for women being involved with sex too, I know it's a sensitive place for a lot of women and we're just more prone to bladder issues in general. But I am glad I didn't stop because I at some point got down enough that I was like, I guess this is just my new normal. But as I dig further and further into it, I uncovered the chronic bacterial infections that I'm now treating that are improving all aspects of my life. My bladder's gotten better, my mood has gotten better, my energy levels have gotten better. And then the emotional healing and the brain retraining, and particularly, is just making life just better. And understanding that the stress and the trauma response was really, I'm not saying it's the only cause of the bladder pain, but it was one of the root causes, was the
Mhm.
emotional stuff.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if the bacteria stuff would ever happen without the emotional stuff, or maybe it was just this perfect storm.
Yep.
But please work with a naturopathic doctor. Please work with a brain retraining specialist, because I I never knew that this was possible when this first started.
Mhm.
So there is so much hope and you will get better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with people. It's
Yeah.
gonna really be inspiring for so many women
I
because
hope so.
that particular issue is becoming just more and more and more common over time, unfortunately. And I think a big reason for that is because we're becoming more toxic, our nervous systems are getting more dysregulated, and therefore we're getting more of these chronic infections and stuff like that. And it's just, yeah, our society is creating a perfect storm with nutritional deficiencies and all the rest,
Yeah.
for people to get
And,
sicker. So
and it kind of makes sense that I always think, you know, you're not going to get through life like completely unscathed, right? Like
mhm.
you're adventurous, you're doing stuff, we're exposed to viruses and bacteria. I'm not going to stop living my life. But what
Yes.
I've learned is there's a good chance that like a lot of people have been exposed to like a tick-borne illness or some sort of viral infection at any point in their life. But your immune system has your back. Like it keeps things
Mhm.
in check. The only reason things got out of check for me was because my emotional body was out of whack. My nervous system was so dysregulated, it affected the immune system and couldn't keep things under control. And I feel like it's such a simple thing, but understanding that connection just is so empowering. It's like, oh, I keep my nervous system down. I
Yes.
keep the anxiety levels down. I keep the mental health healthy. The physical stuff goes away. Like your immune
Yes.
system is really smart.
Yes. It's a powerful force, but it's almost like we have to have our own backs
Yes.
emotionally so that our body can have our immune systems back and then
Yes,
our
you're
immune
right.
system can have our back.
We have to have our own backs
Yeah.
first. You're like, I got you. We're okay. And then the immune system's like, oh, okay, we're safe. We
Yeah.
don't have to freak out anymore, trying to take care of all this other stuff, allowing these bacteria to overgrow. We're going to go back to what we're doing because we're safe and we don't have to worry about all this other stuff. It all
Yeah.
makes sense now
Yeah.
in a way I never would have understood it before. And I will keep doing brain retraining. It's been a little more sporadic because as I get better, obviously, I think we all have a tendency to wean off of supplements or whatever we're doing. And then when you need
Yeah.
it again, it's there for you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole point is that as you get your brain to a place where it feels safer in a broader array of circumstances, then you don't need it as much. And then it's like the sporadic events here or there that are particularly stressful when you're like, oh shit, I realize I'm having a
Yeah,
really intense response. I should probably do something about that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's
So,
when you can turn back to your practitioner. It's like,
yeah.
all right, we did 5 or 6 sessions. I feel like I have a good grounding place. I'm doing all my own tools, but then every once in a while life throws your curveball and you're like, I need a little more support. And you
Yep.
can always go back and maybe something else comes up that you didn't realize was contributing to your current state.
Yep.
But I love brain retraining. Thank you for sharing it with me. It's been incredible.
Yeah. Thank
Oh,
you for sharing your experience with everybody else.
yes. I
Because yeah, hopefully this tool spreads to the rest of the world, because I mean, I just think that there are so many people out there that are unfortunately stuck with the tools of the past and they're slow. And, I want people to be getting better and get better as fast as they can. And I think
Yeah.
this is one of those tools that's going to get them there. So thank you for telling people about it.
Yes, thank you for having me. This was really great. I feel very happy that I can share it, and so I hope it helps people.